Good morning, everyone. I lied. It was a little less than 2 minutes, but thank you all so much for being here. My name is Dani Nierenberg. I am president and co-founder with Bernie Pollock of Food Tank. For those of you who do not know us, we are a research and advocacy organization really devoted to highlighting stories of hope and success in food and agriculture systems, and with the intention of really inspiring, motivating, and activating positive change around food. I am so incredibly grateful to be here in person, which is really nice, and I want to thank all of those of you who were able to be here, as well as everyone watching via the live stream. And we have such an amazing lineup of folks who are committed to preventing food waste who we'll be hearing from today. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Speaker Nancy Pelosi for allowing us to use this beautiful space. This is a very special place, and it's not often used by outsiders, so it's really wonderful to be here, and I want to thank the speaker again. Food Tank is incredibly excited to be partnering with WeightWatchers, Bread for the World, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Healthy Living Coalition, and the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. A huge shout out to our wonderful partners, Niyathi Shah and Lucy Shanker from WW, for their incredible commitment to this issue and for making this event possible. I'd like to give them a round of applause. Before I introduce our first panel, I have the honor of sharing a statement sent to us from Congressmember Dan Newhouse, a Republican from Washington State, in support of the bill. He says, "This law should never discourage people from helping their neighbors or encourage them to throw away perfectly good food. The Food Donation Improvement Act will enact logical reforms that will provide clarity and protection to farmers, retailers, and nonprofits seeking in good faith to assist the hungry, helping those in need to have access to food that would otherwise go to waste." Thank you to Representative Newhouse for those really inspiring words. I obviously couldn't agree more. This bill is truly bipartisan in a very divided country, in a very divided world, so it's incredible to see so much partnership and collaboration when it's needed the most. Now let me turn to Sima Sistani, the Chief Executive Officer of WeightWatchers International. Thank you so much for your commitment, Sima. You work with an amazing team and an amazing coalition, so thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dani. I just have to take a moment. This is, I'm a bit overwhelmed, to be honest, because as a child of immigrants whose parents are naturalized citizens, this is so exciting for me. I'm so happy to be here to talk to this room full of change makers about the bipartisan, bicameral Food Donation Improvement Act. We're all here today because of one person, Lou. Lou has been a dedicated WeightWatchers member for years, and he's spent decades running a food bank in St. Louis. About a year ago, Lou emailed us about a piece of legislation that needed our attention, the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act. Lou thought this was an issue that WeightWatchers could get involved with, given our interest in addressing food insecurity. He was frustrated with the lack of clarity in which the Emerson Act left corporations in to where he couldn't accept donations. We asked around, we heard from our partners who shared that they'd also been trying to get the act amended for years, but they really needed companies to make some noise. So here we are, making noise. When people think about WeightWatchers, they might think about us being the leader in weight loss management, but we are critically a company founded on community, a community built on healthy habits, and our communities need our help. An estimated 50 million people experience food insecurity. This is maddening when you think about the fact that 35% of the food in the US is going to waste. This is why we're here today. In addition to championing the work of our nonprofit partners, we're here today because the private sector also has a role in improving America's food system. If Weight Watchers is going to be about healthy habits, then we have the responsibility to democratize and aid access to healthful, wholesome foods. We're asking legislators to push this bill forward. We've built a coalition of over 60 cross-sector partners, all dedicated to fighting food waste and insecurity through the Food Donation Improvement Act. We've garnered support from over 41,000 citizens through the Change.org petition. We've brought together Congress members from across the aisle, food rescue groups from across the country, and companies across industry, all to create a better food system. This is the power of community. And while we know this isn't the end-all solution to eradicate food insecurity, not even close, it's a step, a meaningful step to helping those 50 million people facing food insecurity every day. Because if there's one thing that Lou taught us, it's that every voice matters. And we are here to use ours. I'm grateful to bring Emily Heil from the Washington Post and Congressman McGovern to the stage. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Pingree was unable to make it today, but we thank her, we wish her well. And before we get started, it's my honor to deliver this petition to Congressman McGovern on behalf of the 41,000 U.S. citizens. Let's get this bill passed. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm excited to meet a lot of you. My name's Emily Heil. I'm a reporter for the Washington Post. I cover food issues. In a previous life, I was a congressional reporter, so I'm back in my old stomping grounds. I think I used to chase this congressman around looking for answers every now and then.
I hope I gave them to you.
Yeah, pretty good. But today we're talking about this piece of legislation, and I wondered, Congressman, can you start out by telling us a little bit about the underlying legislation, the Bill Emerson Act? What impact has that had, and at what point how did you realize that there were still barriers to what it set out to accomplish?
Well, the Bill Emerson Act really, first of all, thank you. It's great to be with you, and to Danny and Sima, thank you so much, and thank you for the box of petitions. I appreciate that. But the Bill Emerson Act really was designed to make it easier for people to donate food. That was perfectly good, but people are always afraid of being sued, or there might be some sort of negative impact about donating food, and so that was the whole point, was to try to make it easier and make people feel more comfortable in being able to donate food. It turns out that it needs to be clarified. That's what this legislation that we're talking about will do, clarifying definitions and making companies, farmers, restaurants, everybody feel more comfortable and at ease in being able to donate food. And so I'm thrilled that there's huge bipartisan support, and I believe we will get this done this year, in large part thanks to all of the pressure that is being brought to bear. But this is common sense, and it was mentioned at the beginning, we're living in a very polarized time right now, but I'm a believer that you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. And this is something that we seem to agree on, so let's get it done.
So you're saying words that I don't think we hear very often here, like common sense and bipartisan. So, what is that process looking like for you right now, trying to put together support for this bill? What's your elevator pitch to your colleagues?
Is that this is something we all can agree on, and as evidenced by the fact, you heard a nice endorsement from Dan Newhouse and Jackie Walorski. It's bipartisan over in the Senate. So, like who's against this? I'm sure there'll be a couple. Because there are a couple against everything. But the deal is, there's no reason not to do this. And we're living in a country, the richest country in the history of the world, where unfortunately close to 40 million people don't know where the next meal is going to come from. And I'm ashamed of that fact. And this is not the whole solution, but this is part of the solution. Because when we talk about fighting hunger and food insecurity, it's not just about handing people food, it's about handing people nutritious food, good food, because we don't want to solve one problem and create another. And again, I believe we can get this done. Whether we attach it to a bill like the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act, or whether we have to bring this separately. I just want to get it over the finish line before the end of the year, and I chair the House Rules Committee, and so we can do whatever the hell we want to do, right? So we will...
Spoken like a Rules Committee.
We will find a way to get this over to the Senate to make sure that they have to deal with it. And
And there are a lot of different ways at this bill, and I think it speaks to the sort of intersectionality of it. You have folks who are really concerned with hunger and food scarcity, and you have people who are really concerned about the environmental piece of it. Do you tailor your pitch to your colleagues? Are you coming, whenever you say, what's your bill about? Well, it's helping make it easier for companies to do X. That's got to sound pretty good to Republicans, right?
Yeah, but I would even like to believe that what sounds good to Republicans and Democrats and independents or whatever you may be is that, look, this is about helping people. This is about making sure people have access to good, nutritious food. I think food is a fundamental human right. And that of all the things to worry about, people shouldn't have to worry about access to good, nutritious food. We finally, my friend Chef Tom Colicchio is here, who's been a long time champion on these issues, but we have been pushing for a long time to get the White House to do a White House conference on nutrition, health, and hunger. And finally, this administration has said, yes, this has to be part of the discussion, right? But we need to, look at everything. We need to connect all the dots, and that's one of the things this bill does. It helps connect the dots so that companies, feel that they can donate good food to people, and then people can have access to that good food and not discard it. As was said at the beginning, 35% of the food that we grow and produce in this country, we discard. My grandmother, when I was a kid, eating, she'd say, eat everything on your plate because it's a sin if you don't. I thought I was going to go to hell if I didn't eat all my food. And, it's kind of stuck with me. It really is, sinful. It is unconscionable that really good food is discarded. I work with a group in Massachusetts called Love and Spoonfuls. And they have a refrigerated truck, and they go to all these different supermarkets and pick up food that would be basically thrown away. Vegetable. Don't even get me going on the Best Buy date stuff. But this food is then delivered to food pantries, to senior centers, to people in need, and it ensures that they get a good, nutritious, healthy meal. And I think that's something that we all should, there should be no controversy over that.
And Congressman, to what extent is a barrier to more people participating in the donor program, to what extent is that more a lack of awareness rather than specifically the provisions in your bill that are going to alleviate concerns that folks might have in their legal departments? Is there an awareness problem too?
There is an awareness problem. I talk to a lot of people who don't know that there are Good Samaritan laws that even exist. So that's one thing, right? And then people with extensive legal departments will say, well, but it's written in a way that I'm not sure about this or about that. Well, that's what this bill does. So it removes the excuse. But we all need to do a better job of awareness. The other thing, this problem is so huge, right? We also have to, and I hope in the next farm bill we can talk about this, is it needs to be elevated in USDA. We need, it's not just about awareness, but we have small and medium-sized farms and businesses that want to participate, but don't have the woman or manpower to be able to, to store the food, to get the food to where it needs to go. So maybe there needs to be an office within USDA, not just the liaison, but an actual office to oversee a nationwide program to recapture all this food. And maybe that is something we can talk about at this White House conference.
Interesting. Now, tell me, you've got all these folks. A lot of them are going to be making Hill visits this afternoon. They're going to be visiting with members of Congress. They're going to be helping you make the case for this. As someone who's been on the other side of those sorts of meetings, what do you want to hear? What would you want to hear from advocates? What can they tell their members to make the case for this?
Well, I think one of the things that I think is really powerful are human, real-life stories. I mean, we live in a time where we're so inundated with, facts and figures. Even when I say 35% of the food that we produce or grows is discarded, I'm not sure people feel that, right? But I think talking about what this means in real-life terms, talking about people with lived experiences who can benefit from this, I think can move members of Congress. I always tell people intelligence is not a prerequisite for serving in Congress, but we're all human beings, right? And people can be moved by human stories, and so I think you tell them. The other thing is, you all have power, you all can vote, you all have constituencies, you all have friends that can vote, and so don't leave without a commitment to have them co-sponsor the bill, or at least say they will vote for the bill. I always tell people, members of Congress are very good at telling you how, it's great to see you, or, I don't like hunger, and I don't like this, and then you realize after you've left Washington that they didn't really agree or commit to anything, right? So don't be a cheap date, get a commitment, and we'll get this done.
And tell me a little bit more, what other further steps do you see? You mentioned an office at USDA. What's next? I mean, this is, kind of, as you said, a drop in the bucket. What bigger steps, what bigger goals should folks have?
Well, on the issue of food waste, I wish there was a better terminology than food waste. I don't know, we got to figure out a better way, because it doesn't sound particularly appetizing. But Chellie Pingree, who unfortunately, as you mentioned, has COVID, has really been a champion on this. She's an organic farmer. She has been visionary on this stuff. So her and I are going to be looking at, not only the child nutrition reauthorization bill, but the next farm bill and some of the appropriations bills as ways to try to further some of these efforts. And at the end of the day, look, I'm into this because I really am committed to ending food insecurity and nutrition insecurity in this country. And that's what we have this White House conference that will be happening in September. This has to be a place where ideas like this are not only elevated, but we get commitments from the administration to take concrete steps to solving this problem. We have so much to do in a very short time to do it. This is part of it. We ought to be talking about making sure that there are free universal school meals for every child in this country. We ought to be doing the same thing for our summer meal program, making sure that the flexibilities are there. We need to understand the challenges that our seniors are facing and that working families are facing with food insecurity. I'll just end with this. Hunger is a political condition. That doesn't mean it's partisan. It means it's a political condition. We have everything we need to end it. We just have not had the political will. We haven't elevated these issues to the point that they need to be. And your being here and your knocking on doors is helping create the political will.
To what extent do you think the pandemic has thrown these issues into high relief? How are we seeing more of the kind of issues that this bill hopes to address?
Yeah. So the pandemic really shined a bright light on the disparities and the inequities in this country. But let's be honest, they existed before the pandemic. They just get worse. So when people tell me, I can't wait till we get back to normal, I always say, I don't want to get back to normal. Normal is, 38, 40 million people who don't know where their next meal is going to come from. Normal is kids coming to school hungry. Senior citizens going to emergency rooms because they're taking their medication on an empty stomach because they can't afford food. So we don't want to go back to normal. So the pandemic, during the pandemic, we instituted some, some flexibilities and some new approaches to dealing with food insecurity. Some of those things we need to keep. The free meals in school, the flexibility in free meals for everybody during the summer, for example, those need to be kept. So the pandemic has given us an opportunity to to focus on this issue. We should have been focusing on it a long, long time ago. And instead, it get bogged down in the politics of, oh, you know, people just need to work, and then they don't have to worry about food. Well, the reality is the majority of people who can work and who are on SNAP actually do work. So that's just the bullshit argument, right? I mean, the bottom line is that, you know, we need to get the facts out, and we need to move to and put into place best practices. And we ought to have our goal to be to end hunger and food insecurity and end nutrition insecurity by the year 2030. That is the UN goal. I mean, that ought to, we ought to think big again. One of the problems in Washington is over the years we all got into the practice of thinking small. You know, oh, you know, if we could put up a stop sign, that's a big deal. No, we need to fix this problem. And for those who are not moved by the moral arguments, and only moved by the bottom line, if we get this right, we're going to save a boatload of money and avoidable health care costs, you know, and lost productivity in the workplace, and you name it. This is better outcomes in schools. I mean, this needs to be a priority. And again, we have an opportunity with this White House conference. And so I'd urge all of you, I mean, there are virtual listening sessions going on all over the country, you know, plug into them, raise these issues, talk about the food waste issue, but demand that this White House conference not only be an interesting conference, but be much more than a press conference, right? Be something transformational. The last time we had a discussion like this at the White House was in 1969. That's when we put a man on the moon that year. And out of that conference came WIC, the modern-day SNAP program, and a whole bunch of other stuff, right? We want to do better than that. And it's not just about new programs, it's about connecting the dots. Because you mentioned the word intersectionality, right? When you talk about this, it's not just about USDA. There's a transportation element to this, right? There's a housing element to this. There's an education element to this. There's a healthcare element to this. So we got to bring everybody together, and we got to, you know, which we don't do very well here because we're all so siloed. But yeah, here's the problem. What can you all put on the table? And this has to be part of it.
And so tell me a little bit about what that will require. I mean, is it more, what would be the key to that? Would it be more corporate buy-in? Would it be just more awareness? Would it be more, you know, bringing together of those different groups? What unlocks that?
Well, I mean, first of all of the government has to be at this table, right? Every agency government. We need all the nonprofits at the table, and we need the business community at the table. You know, some of the stuff we're talking about here today, that this bill hopefully will facilitate, is really, it's not, you know, like super costly, right? Some of the people can do this, but they're not doing it because they're afraid of kind of legal implications. So let's remove that. That's part of it, right? But there has to be, the reason why we want the White House to do this is because I'm trying to think of, like, who's a better convener than the White House? You know, who has the gravitas or the authority to bring everybody together and say, here's the problem, let's all of you come in. And they are reaching out to the corporate community, the business community, to say, okay, we want to do this, what can you put on the table? You know, how can you help us? Can you help us with a pilot? Can you help us, are there things that you can do that will change, you know, the way you currently do things that will enable more food, nutritious food to be available to people who are in need?
Tell me a little bit about the prospect of a majority flip. What does that do to grand plans?
What does that mean?
Well,
I know. Look, Jesus. I mean,
I saved it, the hard part for last.
Yeah. Look, that's why, you know, we can think about all the, you know, possibilities and, you know, the things that could happen if things dramatically change, right? I think we have to focus on what we can get done in the next couple of months. Our focus has to be on this White House conference, passing this legislation. I mean, we have what we have through the end of this year, hopefully beyond that, but we won't know what happens until November. Right now, we have to focus on getting things done. You know, this is not, we shouldn't be agonizing about what might happen. It ought to be, what can we get things done? And I'm a believer that, like I said on this, I mean, there are Republicans that are supporting this, so we welcome that, and this should be bipartisan, it should be nonpartisan, and I'm hopeful. I really am. The other stuff, I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what will happen.
Well, I'm going to let the Congressman have the last word here, but I loved your advice about not being a cheap date. What a great mantra for you guys.
That's a very Worcester, Massachusetts phrase. So.
Yeah, I believe that's congressional parlance, right? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aubrey. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Great to talk to you. I know you've got some amendments to go with.
I want to thank Sima, Emily, and of course, congressional superhero, Representative Jim McGovern. What an incredible discussion. And I want to remind folks that Congressmember McGovern mentioned the White House Conference on Hunger that's happening in September of this year. There's not a date set yet when it becomes available. I'm sure you'll all know. But there are listening sessions in the lead up to that, and Eugene is convening one on Thursday, Bernard, of this week. And you can find out more information at eugene.com. Before we turn to our next panel, over the weekend, Senator Cory Booker. Thank you. I'm sorry, everyone. So over the weekend, Senator Cory Booker also shared some words about the Food Donation Improvement Act. And he says, across our nation, millions of Americans struggle with food and nutrition insecurity, dual crises that have been further heightened by the lasting effects of COVID-19. Through events like these, I'm encouraged to see advocates sound the alarm on these pressing issues and address them. We must continue to work to ensure that everyone has access to healthy, nutritious food, and we can start by making sure the food that we grow does not go to waste. So thank you, Senator Booker. Now please join me in welcoming a panel discussion by Allison Aubrey of National Public Radio, who will be moderating Reverend Eugene Cho, the President and CEO of Bread for the World, Jada Hoerr, the Chief Resource Officer of the Midwest Food Bank, and my good friend Emily Broadleib, the Director of the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. So welcome to you all. Please take the stage.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that introduction, Danny. I am a health correspondent for NPR and in a former life focused exclusively on food and food policy for about 6 or 7 years. So I've been focused on lots of divisive issues. This week I'm covering prescription drugs and reproductive health, and of course those things lead to further divide in our country. So it's so great to be here talking about something where all of us can agree, and the set of solutions is right in front of us. For a long time I covered, when I first heard about food waste, I remember Secretary Vilsack back 8 or 9 years ago saying, giving this great analogy that there's enough wasted food in the United States to fill the tallest skyscraper in Chicago 44 times, And that's just impossible to get your head around that amount of food. For me, I was sitting here covering this issue in Washington, D.C., wondering how is it that so much food could go to waste at the very time when there's so many people out there very committed to salvaging it and redistributing it. I didn't quite understand all the challenges, and one trip to LA brought it into focus for me. At 5 o'clock in the morning at a wholesale market in South Central LA, where thousands of vendors come with all of their fresh produce, I was standing with a supplier who had this beautiful batch of berries and peaches. And the buyer came in, and the truck driver from the buyer came in and said, nope, we're rejecting it. And he pulled from the third cart down one peach that had this tiny amount of what he said was mold on it. And I thought to myself, like, oh my God, like I would eat that peach. This whole batch of food is being rejected. And, you know, the guy looked at me, he's like, yep, that's our life. That's it right there. So it dawned on me that there is like no central control tower, you know, where no air traffic control tower where someone was sitting atop saying, you know, like rejected berries and Salinas, or like wholesale, like overstock in the Costco in Tulsa. Like there is no big picture because our food system is so fragmented, and this waste happens at every part along the system, right? From the farm to transportation to distribution points, you know, wholesale, retail, grocery stores, all the way to our homes. And that is why this last mile problem is such a big problem. It has now dawned on me that you guys are looking at the air traffic control tower right here. These are the folks that figure out where is the wasted food, how do we recover it, how do we get it to the people in need. So I want to start with you, Jada Hoerr. At the Midwest Food Banks, you distributed like $500 million of food last year. Talk a little bit about the demand you're seeing and what has happened 2 years in as we sort of move to this next phase.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and exactly to your story about the one peach causing waste for an entire truckload. That is the model of Midwest Food Bank, and how do we, on a monthly, weekly, daily basis, receive loads like that. And so we distribute that food that we receive, donated food, to nonprofits. So across the nation, we serve 2,100 nonprofits, providing them food on a monthly, weekly, daily basis. And so if we go back and look at the demand spike, obviously we can imagine we all had kind of insecurity and uncertain demand at the beginning days of the pandemic, right? There was just an unusual demand curve for food across all aspects of the industry. And so we saw a spike. And then thankfully, because of resources, whether stimulus funds, whether USDA programs, we saw that kind of come back to a leveling out through the end of 2020 and 2021. And here we are in 2022 seeing that same spike again. So of our 2,100 agencies, we've seen a spike of 25%. And so for our world, of the people that we're ultimately impacting, that's approximately 400,000 individuals.
So demand is back up. Right?
Demand is back up.
Yeah.
And so, and again, like our demand, inflation is impacting all of us, and so our consumption cycles have changed, and so it's an ever-changing environment for us to receive donated food, and we want nothing to stand in the way of being able to receive that donated food.
Got it. And Eugene, you organize faith communities to focus a lot on this problem. What are some of your success stories and some of your challenges in gleaning and recovering food and sort of doing your work amid this environment of increased need and inflation?
Yeah. Well, thank you again. It's a pleasure and a joy to be here. I know Congressman McGovern has left. I was shocked because he felt like he was preaching a sermon in many ways. He mentioned sin and Jesus. So anyways, so he's done my job. But a couple things that I would like to share again, because I think it's worth repeating. We are in a hunger crisis. We need to be shouting that as loudly as we can. Approximately 41 to 50 million neighbors in our country, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, within our families, 13 million children. So for me, whenever I think about these statistics, I think about my 30 years as a pastor of a local church or local churches. And so for me, families, names, children, they come to mind very, very vividly. I think sometimes when we do this work day in, day out in the policy wonky world, we can somehow indirectly detach the work that we're doing with the reality of real lived experiences. So for me, I would say that the reason why we need faith voices is that I appreciate in an imperfect world, we have religious leaders who understand the daily stories of women, men, children, and families. That's incredibly critical. So as we go about this act and as we go about this advocacy, we're not just advocating for a particular bill, we're really speaking on behalf with, alongside, we're amplifying the stories of so many people. One last thing that I'll just share is the concept of gleaning has been part of faith traditions forever. It's who we are. We understand what it means to care for our neighbor. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm preachy here, but for us, to be people of faith means that we elevate our care for our neighbors around us. And so gleaning is part of our tradition. One of my favorite stories in the scriptures, and again, please excuse me if I come across preachy, from John chapter 6, verse 12, there's a story about Jesus feeding the multitudes of people. The feeding of the 5,000, scholars believe there were 8,000 to 12,000 people present there. But verse 12, Jesus says, "Let nothing be wasted." And so even in that story, we have this beautiful story that we're to steward these resources. And we know that in a perfect world, if we were able to redistribute all of these wasted food, it would feed those who are food insecure, 1, 2, 3, fourfold in our nation. And then certainly as a country, we also have responsibilities and privilege to come alongside those around the world who are also struggling with hunger. And there's a different conversation, but also a similar conversation about loving our neighbors both near and far.
Thank you so much for that. Emily, I want to talk about directly what's in the bill, but before we do that, you and I were talking about the progress that's been made over the last 7 or 8 years. One example you brought to my attention was how much shared table foods and sort of gathering wasted food in a school setting, just with, parents volunteering in their own elementary school, how that has made a difference and how having a set of rules to do that has made it easier. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I'll start first by picking up on the policy wonk. I think that was me, but that's okay. Guilty as charged. Happy policy wonk here.
You're not detached at all.
But I will say, I think, from my perspective, I'm, a law professor, and I'm not on the front lines of rescuing food or feeding people, but we are on the front lines of answering the legal questions coming from schools, as you just mentioned, coming from restaurants, coming from, food recovery organizations that are trying to convince donors with extra food to give the food to them. So I can say that this, the issues that are being addressed by this bill are very much things that we talk about, more than once a week, many times a month, and many, many times a year, trying to help people get answers so they can donate the food that they have. I do think there's been a huge amount of progress. I think there's a lot more to do. I know Representative McGovern spoke about the Farm Bill. The last Farm Bill in 2018 was the first one that actually included food waste and support in the Farm Bill ever. So before that, we were spending $400 billion, $500 billion every 5 years on the food system, and not a single dollar of that was going to make sure that food made it to people's plates instead of to the trash. So that was huge progress. I think in schools is another great example. The awareness and knowledge of the amount of food going to waste and of the opportunities to rescue that, to feed it to other children in the school through share tables, and to then try to donate, and that, hopefully we'll come back to, because that's one of the things that this bill is trying to help address. And I give credit to you in particular and other journalists like you who raised the awareness of this issue and brought these stories out, these individual anecdotes that really show why, when you put them all together, we're wasting 35% of the food that we have in this country.
So let's talk a little bit about what's in the Food Donation and Improvement Act. In essence, it's sort of Emerson Act 2.0, is that right?
Yeah. So there's a couple big things. So I'm going to give a couple of anecdotes, actually. We mentioned schools. One big issue is schools have they have extra food at the end of the day. They maybe have shared tables or whatever the reason. And schools were calling us and saying, at the end of the day, we have extra food. We know that our own children are on school meal plans. Their families are food insecure. But in order to be protected under the Emerson Act right now, we need to send this food to a food bank on the other side of town and then send our families over there or to some pantry to pick up that food. We want to, find out, can we be protected to give that food directly? We've heard from restaurants restaurants who have said, these amazing, wonderful chefs who have said, at the end of the night, I had 10 extra plates of chicken. I drove around. I called every local food bank. No one was open. No one would take it. But I couldn't give it away directly because I wouldn't be protected from liability unless I gave it through a nonprofit. There's these very real examples that kind of build the basis for this bill, which does three main things. The one very big one is that it requires the USDA to put out regulations explaining the Emerson Act. So this is great because it will, take away some of our job, which is answering all these questions of businesses about, am I protected if I do this? Am I protected if I do that? Congress passed this amazing legislation, but they never put anyone in charge of actually fleshing it out or answering those questions. So we've become that de facto, FAQ hotline for the Emerson Act, but I can't give an authoritative answer. So this requires USDA to answer those questions, to put that out in front of folks and make it really easy for businesses. The second thing it does is, in that example of the schools that I mentioned or the restaurant, it protects donations of food directly to people in need from food businesses and from farmers. So let's say the majority of food is still going to go through amazing nonprofits, food banks, et cetera. But in those cases where it makes a lot of sense to be able to give food directly, and schools, restaurants, et cetera, are trained in food safety, they're able to give it directly if they choose to do that. And then the last thing it does is that it allows, right now in the Emerson Act, there's only protection if the food bank or nonprofit gives the food away for free to the end recipients. And this would allow protection if the food is given for free or sold at a very low cost. And what does that do? Well, I know there's a lot of folks here from the food rescue community. The cost of actually rescuing the food is not insignificant, and that has gone up. And I know from so many of you I've spoken to that you have less volunteers. That's been a big effect of COVID. So you have to pay people, and you want to pay them well. And you have transportation costs, which are going up as gas prices go up. So allowing nonprofits that flexibility that they could try out models where some of that food is sold in a retail setting or some other. I heard from one nonprofit that said if we could charge people $1 to do home deliveries of food, it would make it possible for us to do this and to keep this model going and bring money into this nonprofit that's just serving people in need.
Thank you. So Jada and Eugene, as you listen to sort of the specifics in the bill, what in there would make your jobs easier?
I'll speak first and just say that clarifying is always helpful. We talked earlier, Representative McGovern said it's kind of a dual challenge of awareness and clarification. And so we are always, when we are procuring and looking for new food donors, trying to make them aware of the Bill Emerson Act and providing that information to them. So helping them to make it aware. And any effort that is helping to eliminate food waste and feed people in need is positive for our effort. So if it's helping us to find new food donors, that's wonderful from a large-scale food bank. But if it is serving people in need out in the community through other food rescue organizations, that also helps us because our ultimate goal is not to grow the food bank, but is to serve people in need.
Eugene?
First of all, Emily, we love policy wonks. Just want to make sure that you know that. I think, yes, we can be friends. I think it's really important to amplify the fact that when we have conversations with members of Congress or constituents, no one is saying we love food being wasted. We know conceptually, but also from an empathetic level, we know we have an issue in our nation. We know it's a problem, and I think the reason why this bill makes sense is we're trying to do something about it. There's a difference between knowledge and then the implementation. So there's elements about this. One of the stories that I love highlighting is that as a local church pastor many years ago, we knew families that could not afford, because either A, they didn't have a car, or because gas was expensive then, it's skyrocketed since now. So to get into their car, to go to another part of town in order to get food, it literally was, it became almost impossible. So I love the specifics of trying to make and reduce barriers. let's name the barriers, and how do we remove some of these barriers so that people who are experiencing, neighbors who are experiencing food insecurity, that those issues can be mollified. Those are some of the specifics. The last thing that I'll just say is to codifying this as a responsibility under USDA. Right? We need, beyond the implementers here, we also need that HQ, the headquarters, that are really going to be held accountable and responsible. So we love that aspect of the act as well.
So when you think about all the logistical friction in getting food from a place where it would be wasted to a place where it can feed people, I'm imagining that at the food bank level, you're always looking for the most nutritious food possible, right? You don't want just bread, which might be the biggest surplus. How do you navigate that? And is part of this, I mean, is part of getting the perishable, healthier foods, is that really where some of the obstacles are? I mean, people might question, you know, what liability do I have if it goes bad? It's also more difficult to, I imagine, transport things if they need refrigeration.
Yeah, infrastructure within the food bank, food rescue industry is critical. You need that refrigeration, you need that freezer capacity, you need to be quick. You know, that last mile is critical, especially with the perishable food. But it was briefly hit on earlier that even for the healthy, shelf-stable, the food dating is also a challenge that we all address and we're facing. Yeah, so I think to answer your question, it is important for all of us to be focused on nutrition, because it's not just food insecurity, it's nutrition insecurity, but also being realistic and pragmatic as we work with food donors in large scale, recognizing that we will help rescue all of the food that they have and they're willing to donate, and do our best to advocate for the healthy food options for those that we serve. And so I know at Midwest Food Bank we've made the investment. It is consistently focusing on our facilities and partnering with our agencies so that they have the cooling and the freezing capacity, not just in their facilities, but also in their transportation.
Got it. I think we just have a minute or so left. So the Food Donation Improvement Act, do you think it will pass in 2022?
Well, I feel very hopeful after that rousing statement from Representative McGovern, like, you know, he's going to make it happen. I do want to pick up on one other thing he said, which is, I think this is really important. It's common sense legislation. Congress, when we passed the Emerson Act, it was the first law of this kind around the world, and it was amazing. This is really allowing the act to do what it was meant to do, but we have a lot more to do besides this, too. This is really setting a foundation. It's making it easier to donate, but we should be going out there and, you know, fixing date labeling. There's a Food Date Labeling Act, investing in the infrastructure needed, and then really, you know, pushing and encouraging those businesses who aren't here today to make sure that they're donating everything they can. So I hope it happens this year. We have more work to do as well. And tomorrow morning, we're going to be talking also about things in the next farm bill that we think, so, you know, we'll have information about that later too.
Excellent. I'm being told to wrap. Thanks so much for joining us. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was great. Can people hear me? Is my mic on?
Thank you so much.
I just want to repeat what Emily broadly had to say. There is so much work left to do. This is just one part of it. So I think after this bill is passed, and I do believe it will be passed, that there's a lot more to be done on this issue. So again, thank you to the panel. Thank you to Allison and Aubrey for being here as well. Before I introduce Tom Colicchio, let me quickly share a statement from the daughter of Bill Emerson, who was a Congress member from Missouri, which is my home state. He was credited for passing the initial legislation, the Emerson Act, that the Food Donation Improvement Act will improve and expand upon. And Catherine says, I am so deeply grateful for the continued support for the anti-hunger efforts inspired by my father and his work in Congress. There is plenty of food in the world. We just need the will and the means to get it to everyone. In addition to the direct benefit of redirecting food from the landfill to those in need, the bipartisan leadership around the Food Donation Improvement Act is an additional tribute to my father, Mickey Leland, and others on both sides of the aisle who work to address these issues. So that's, I think, really inspiring, and so great to hear from Catherine about her late father and his efforts. So in addition to the partners we've mentioned earlier, a big thank you to all of the coalition partners, many of whom are here today, around the advocacy and the legislation they've been trying to push. There are over 60 of them. So let's give them a round of applause. They've done so much incredible work. So now I'm going to introduce a person who, I think I can make it. Thank you, Bernie. I got it. Being short is hard when you're on these stools. Okay. Again, I don't think Tom Colicchio needs a big introduction. He's my favorite chef. He's a food waste warrior, the owner of Crafted Hospitality. Oh, and he's on this Emmy Award-winning show that you may have heard of. I doubt anyone's ever watched in this room, Top Chef. So Tom, if you could join me on stage. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you. As I said, always great to see you. I want to start off about talking about your work on food waste. You spent a lot of your career, obviously, on TV, in kitchens, mostly in kitchens. But you're a big policy advocate for a better food system, and I think that's what I've always admired most about you. And you spent a long time on this issue around preventing food waste. And I'm wondering, what resonates around the issue of food waste with you as both a chef and a business person and a policy advocate?
So number one, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to share a stage with you. It's been several times that we've done this, and always enjoy it. Also, I want to thank everyone here who's really doing the hard work of making sure people are fed in this country. So thank you. Also, whenever Jim McGovern or Chellie Pingree ask me to come down, I usually do. They've been such champions and really are such an inspiration to so many of us. So as a chef, we're trained never to waste food. When we waste food, it's money out the door. And so it's something that I was trained to make sure we weren't wasting food. Now, when you think about this, food waste, the idea of food waste was something that we didn't really think much about 10 years ago. It was just starting to come into our consciousness, and some of the organizations have done a great job, bringing it to the forefront. But then I think back to my grandparents. We're 2 generations removed from our grandparents living through the Great Depression, where nothing was wasted.
Right.
I watched my grandfather make bacon in the morning, fry bacon, and save the bacon grease.
Right.
And that's what he cooked food. He didn't buy oil, we used that. And so there was this idea that food was valuable, that food meant something. And it's not just the food, it's the people who actually create the food,
Right.
the farmers who are spending their time, and think about all the resources that go into producing food. And so we're devaluing not just the food, but we're devaluing the people that actually are responsible for feeding us and for creating those products. And so we moved away from that over 2 generations because food has become really cheap, and it's been disposable. And so we have to really change our mindset and start really honoring and honoring the people that are growing food, the fishermen that are out there fishing, the farmers that are farming. And so we just need to have a reset here and to sort of start to value what really nourishes us, is sort of the building blocks of life. Without it, where are we going to be?
Absolutely.
And then obviously, for as long as I've been a chef, I've been associated with fighting hunger. And partly because, I say, chefs are usually the first responders when it comes to raising money for issues. And so over the years, I've done work with all the major either rescue organizations or organizations that feed people. But it wasn't until my wife started working on a film called Place at the Table that it gave me a larger platform after the film came out. And also, and Jim said it earlier today, that our hunger is political.
Right.
When that came out in the film, when I heard Jim say this, that kind of changed everything for me, because we know that policy, and really, policy is what actually can help fight hunger.
Absolutely.
So let's hear it for the policy wonks. So that's kind of how why I spend my time doing what I do in bringing these issues together. Because it is a piece, and solving food waste and getting food waste to where it can actually, to where it's needed is part of the puzzle.
Right.
It's not the whole puzzle.
It's not the whole puzzle. I want to go back to something you said about it. When we waste food, we're not just devaluing the food itself, we're devaluing people. And you know, when the pandemic happened and sort of all of these things were uncovered, and you and I have talked about this before, I thought there would be this great reset that you mentioned on how we look at our food systems, how we look at the people who work in our food systems. That hasn't happened yet. And in fact, in some ways, I think it may be a little bit worse. And I'm wondering how we can get people to value food again and to value those who are involved, not just in growing it, but in serving it and harvesting it and doing, you know, all along the food chain, the truck drivers, from, you know, for everyone.
Yeah, I think the result of the pandemic is going to take a while because there's so much talk about decentralizing our food system. We saw with meat processing plants, when some of them closed, it really put a shortage of meat out there. But, you know, where I'm hopeful is that, you know, we all saw the lines of people who were waiting for 2 or 3 hours to get to a food pantry. And if you look at those cars, right, there was a lot of BMWs and Mercedes in those lines as well. And so these are people who never, ever thought that they would be in line for a couple hours to get food. Never in a million years. And so I'm hoping that there's a greater sense of empathy for people who are struggling. Because a pandemic, a simple virus could place so many more people in need. And then also, we got through the pandemic because of a couple things that government did. And this always go back to why government is so important in fixing this problem. Right. Especially the child tax credit, which essentially cut childhood poverty almost in half. And so there's a lot of these answers have to come from government. And this bill, again, what's really interesting to me is I often cited the Emerson bill to either restaurants or other organizations to encourage them to donate food. What I didn't realize is that I wasn't covered.
Sure.
And so I'll give you a couple examples. For a bunch of years at Thanksgiving, one of my restaurants, we closed the restaurant to the public. We actually kept it open to the public, but we didn't charge, and we worked with a few community organizations to bring people in. And somebody asked me about, was there any liability issues? And I said, no, I'm covered under the Emerson Act. I'm not. Right. Luckily, we never got anybody sick and it didn't get sued. But also, keep this in mind. So let's say right now, there's a hurricane, barreling towards Galveston and Houston area, right? And our friend Jose Andres calls a bunch of restaurants in that area and gets them activated, that they can feed people who are going to need it, feed people in the community that are going to need it, feed first responders. They're not covered. Those restaurants are not covered because those restaurants are feeding people in the community and feeding those first responders. They're not going through a 501c3.
Sure.
And so this is real life. This is what can happen. And we also know that often in disaster, I remember when I was on a boat, World Yachts, after 9/11, and I would come in, I worked the midnight shift, feeding the first responders, and so I would come in and clean the kitchen before I did anything. I would stop everybody from working, clean up the kitchen, number one, because I can't work in a mess. It's just one of those things. But also, I just need it to be clean. And one night, we actually had someone from the Board of Health show up. And they said, wow, this is great, it's really clean in here. And I started talking to the person, and they said that the biggest issue whenever there's a disaster like that and people are getting fed is that food poisoning usually breaks out at some point.
Right.
Because people are just in a rush to get stuff out there.
Sure.
Now, restaurants, again, and usually the response to a disaster is FEMA goes in, they hire someone who just feeds people. But restaurants, number one, a lot of the restaurants are shut down. So they have excess capacity, they have food, and World Central Kitchen, what they do is they actually pay the restaurants to get food out. Mm-hmm. So the restaurants are kept intact, but also restaurants know how to service food because we all have food handlers permits and things like that, so we know how to serve food. So this bill, it really does so much. And the other thing that I want to point out, I think Emily touched on it, but farmers who want to donate also are not covered.
Right.
And that's really important. But I think we need to go further, and some of the ways that we can go further here is I think that we need to actually have food hubs that can take this food especially from the farms, and lightly process it. Because the one area, and we had bills in the last farm bill, there was a farm-to-school portion of the farm bill, and there was money allocated to get food from farmers. Now, farmers, especially, I'm out in North Fork and Long Island, we have a lot of farmers out there, and they're not looking for crop insurance or anything like that. They're looking for markets.
Sure.
And so there's a huge market in public schools. But my mother ran a school cafeteria. And right now, there are very few workers that are really, trained to process food, cook food. They're heating food up.
Right.
But if we had a hub where we can actually reclaim food from farms, bring it to a processing location, process the food, freeze it. Freezer is not a bad word, especially when it comes to saving food waste. Freeze it, and then, because also most of the food, especially in the Northeast, that's being produced is happening in the summer when school's out. And so actually you can get it into the school system. It creates a market for the farmers. It creates a way of getting, alleviating some of the food waste. And we also know that school lunch is one of those critical pieces to ending hunger.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought up freezing and lightly processing. This is such an important part of this. And when we hear processing, I think everyone is like, oh, but processed food doesn't mean ultra-processed food. And that, we don't want everyone in food banks eating ultra-processed.
No, I'm talking about, I do this at home. So right now, I garden. I have a ton of green beans right now. So I take them, I cut them into pieces, I blanch them, I put them in bags, and I freeze them. And I have them, in the winter.
Exactly.
And so, I think we need to start teaching home ec back in schools again, too.
Yay, yay. I also love the idea of a food hub that can help with all of this. And that's where I think local governments can have a big say in all this. And I think what we've learned, maybe over the past 10 years, is that local governments and municipalities, a lot of what they're already doing can trickle up to the Fed.
Yeah, it can, but I think that some of these are there are large problems that a lot of local governments don't have the money to actually build these, and I think there could be a public-private partnership that can actually help build these hubs as well. I let the guys here in Washington, men and women here in Washington, figure that piece out, but I can tell you what I think we need.
Agreed. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is, as a restaurateur, as somebody who thinks about these issues a lot, what would you like to see the restaurant industry doing, the private sector doing, that it's not doing right now around food recovery and food donation?
It's hard to say because we do a lot.
Sure.
For me, I think caterers need to start to step up because they're often left out of the equation, and they are feeding large groups of people, and there's a lot of waste there, especially in buffets. Quite frankly, I'd love to see buffets just outlawed because it's just a way to waste food. Besides that, it's just a lot of waste because you have to actually have them filled at all times. And let's just say you have a buffet and you close at 9 o'clock at night. You still have to have full trays at 9 o'clock at night.
Sure.
And a lot of that food gets wasted. We have 7 minutes left. Okay.
No, please.
Go.
Well, I want to go back to what Congressmember McGovern said about hunger is a political condition, because I know you have so many thoughts on this. You mentioned the wonderful film, A Place at the Table, that you did, that your wife, Lori Silverbush, directed. That movie, that documentary, inspired a lot of folks, and it was in 2012, and 10 years ago now. I think it convinced people that hunger is political, and that what Congressmember McGovern said earlier, that it is a human right, and that it's a travesty that in this country we have so many people hungry. So I'm wondering, just dig a little bit more into that and why that film was so important to you.
Well, I think it helped change the conversation. It helped, number one, shed light on a problem that most people don't know about, most people don't want to talk about. The reason we haven't had a White House conference on hunger is because no president wants to admit that this is such a huge problem.
Right.
It's in a way showing weakness, and of course we don't like to do that here. But also, one thing that I'm concerned about with an act like this. So no one talked about, is there a downside? We talked about whether or not we think this is bipartisan, whether or not people can get behind it. So my concern is that someone will look at this and say, well, there's all this food that's getting to people who need it now, so guess what? We can cut SNAP. We can cut school lunch. And this is the language that so many of us actually sort of, without meaning to, give a lot of weight to that argument. When you see statistics about the amount of billions of pounds of food or meals that have been served through organizations, well, there's a lot of people who look at that and go, well, there's no problem. They have it. Now, what Jim didn't mention, after that conference, that White House conference, we pretty much, through policy, again, through modernized SNAP, the WIC program, modernizing the school lunch program, we almost ended hunger in this country until 1980. And the conversation changed. 1,000 points of lights. You know, let all the nonprofits take care of this.
Sure.
Government doesn't have a role. Let's shrink government, right? All right, you know, let's shrink government to the size that we can drown it in a bathtub. Well, guess what? 50 million Americans are drowning. And probably more soon. And so we have to change the conversation and make sure that we don't allow people who don't care about the issue, we can't allow them to talk about us all having it and they don't have to worry about it. Because the organization, the work that every organization here does is so, so important. And we can't let them use the work that you do as an excuse not to do more from government.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you know, for people like me who talk a lot about, you know, the food crisis, the climate crisis, the hunger crisis, what we don't understand a lot is that what's going on in this country is a huge political crisis around not making sure that Americans have access to healthy, affordable food. And I, you know, this is a real opportunity for all of us who are here today, who will be speaking to congressional members to change that. And that you're no stranger in talking to members of Congress. You have a group of people here who Emily Broad-Leib is going to train and lead to go up, you know, on the Hill and talk to these folks and convince them that they should vote for the Food Donation Improvement Act. What advice do you have for them?
So I co-founded an organization called Food Policy Action, and we spent, we produced a scorecards. We graded Congress and how they voted on food issues, whether it was hunger, farming, clean water, fishing. And I used to lobby. I was an unpaid, unregistered lobbyist, and spent a lot of time on the Hill lobbying. And one story I'll tell you. So I was going through, I actually had a few meetings, and I was walking through the halls, and I noticed that in front of everyone's office, they had a sign that said, "We hire vets." Now, I was going to talk to Steve King from Iowa. That's Steve King. And I went and did a little research real quick and found out how many vets are on SNAP in Iowa. So not in his district, but in Iowa. And I walked into the office, and I thought I was meeting with him. He had to go to the doctor or something. And so his poor staffer, I felt really sorry for him afterwards, because I walked in and I said, "That's a great sign you have there." I said, "You hire vets." I said, "Do you feed them?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, you have 23,000 vets right now in Iowa who are on food stamps. When you hire them, are you paying them enough of a wage so they don't need to use food stamps to go to a food bank?" And he kind of looked at me and he's like, and I just kept hammering him. Finally, he said, "I give up." He said, "I know my boss has really dumb things sometimes." Stop. You know what? They work for you. Okay? And let them know that. And just press the issue and press it hard. And Jim said, get that commitment. Ask them, say, "Are you going to vote for this bill?" And if they say, "Well, we're looking at it," say, "No, this is really easy. This is a yes or no right here." Push them. You know, be nice about it, but be direct and tell them why it's important. And ask the question, do you want to see people hungry in this country? Do you think that's a sign of strength, that we have this many people hungry in this country? You know, the one thing is that you asked me what the film did. When that film played in Europe, people were shocked.
Sure.
Shocked that people were hungry here. Because everyone who's not here looks at this country as this, you know, this great country where, you know, the wine flows out of the faucets. And, and you know, but so just be direct. and just don't let them off the hook. Just keep going. You know, I was up here a few times, and I testified. The first time I testified in a congressional committee, it was, oh God, what am I drawing a blank? Retired congressman from California. Anyway, it'll come to me. It'll come to me when I'm on a plane flying home. And when he was retiring, so this has been about 6 or 7 years now that I've been coming here, and he was retiring, and I was at a press conference about something else. I think it could have been food waste, and he took me aside, and he said, you keep coming back. And he said, a lot of celebrities, they come here once, they do it for a while, we don't see them again. He said, you keep coming back, and we noticed that. Keep coming back.
Yeah.
Keep coming back. Just keep it up. Just keep the pressure up. Don't let the pressure off. We want to end hunger. We can't end hunger. The only way it's going to happen is to keep that pressure up. And every organization, everyone's got to start working together. And Jim talked about everybody's off in their own silos. It's about really getting together and really, talking with one clear voice. And so, when you go to those meetings, just be strong.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Let's give a round of applause to that. And that point, I think that's why the Healthy Living Coalition is so important. These 60-plus organizations who've come together with that one voice to tell Congress that this is no longer acceptable, that this will not stand to have so many Americans hungry. We've had the pandemic. The Ukraine crisis is going to affect Americans deeply next year. And so, I think one of the things that I admire most about you, Tom, is that you've really pushed this idea of not just being a citizen chef, a chef who talks about these issues, but encouraging all of us to be citizen eaters, to be actively engaged with our food system in all of these different ways by talking to Congress. But things, are beyond our control in a lot of ways, including what's happening in Ukraine. What do you hope that political leaders will do to make sure that Americans are fed next year, whether it's this, passing this legislation or doing other things?
Yeah, the real crisis, in America, prices will go up. I was talking to a gentleman last night who owns Continental Grain. It's a huge grain company. And he said American prices are going to go up, but around the world, there will be no food. And so that's the real crisis, because that's going to lead to a lot of upheaval. So that's what really concerns me about this war right now. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to be done. We just have about 30 seconds to wrap up. You are an inspiration always to me. I wonder what keeps you hopeful as you think about these things?
Again, I said it earlier, I hope that there's a greater sense of empathy for people in need.
Yeah.
And, I hope people don't forget that they were in that line, that things are better now and turned around and they were in that line. One thing that I think is great right now is that workers are finally finding a voice, and we're seeing wages go up, and it's not taking a bill coming out of Congress to raise minimum wage, which probably will never happen. So that's encouraging.
Yeah.
And eventually what's going to happen is inflation will come down, but those wages are going to stay where they are. So hopeful.
I am very encouraged by workers in this country right now, including the Starbucks workers, the Chipotle workers, and so many others who are working to organize. Tom Colicchio, thank you for being my inspiration.
Thanks, Katie.
Safe travels home to you and Maya. Okay, so we're going to hear shortly from more members of Congress and leaders representing the nonprofit world, advocacy, academics, and policy. But before we hear from them, I want to read a statement from Congressmember Grace Meng, a Democrat from New York State. She says millions around the U.S. struggle with daily access to nutritious meals to keep them and their families healthy. That is why I was so proud to co-sponsor the Bipartisan Food Donation Improvement Act of 2021. The Food Donation Improvement Act will reform outdated and limited liability for businesses and organizations that donate food. This is a common sense step to increase food donations that fight hunger, reduce food waste, and improve efficiency of donation efforts. And I'm really happy that one of her colleagues, Congressmember Jackie Walorski of Indiana, who is a Republican, shared this video statement that we're going to watch right now.
Good morning, and thank you to the sponsors of today's event for bringing us together today to tackle an important issue. Food insecurity affects far too many Americans in neighborhoods across the country, especially as inflation and skyrocketing gas prices take a toll on working families. Ending hunger is an urgent priority. It's my privilege to work with my Hunger Caucus co-chair Congressman Jim McGovern and other lawmakers to advance realistic and achievable solutions for American families. Making it easier for restaurants and grocery stores, farms, and other businesses to donate food to their neighbors is just plain common sense. Our Food Donation Improvement Act is a tool that will help communities fight hunger. In Indiana and across the nation, Americans have been long characterized by a spirit of generosity. I'm always surprised by the Americans who are going above and beyond to serve their neighbors in need. So many of our communities have been abundantly blessed by generous volunteers and supporters. In Congress, we need to do our part to tear down obstacles to charitable giving, and that starts with the Food Donation Improvement Act. I'm proud to help lead this legislation, and I'm grateful for your role in strengthening this movement. Your work here today is sending a clear message that this is a priority for hardworking Americans who are on the ground every day fighting hunger. Thank you for your support and for your partnership in this mission. Together, we have an opportunity to end hunger and help Americans thrive. I look forward to continuing our vital work together.
Round of applause for Congressmember Walorski. So now I'm excited to invite the following food waste warriors up to the stage to join behind me, and then they'll come up one by one as I interrogate them with questions. So now join me in welcoming Mike Curtin, the CEO of DC Central Kitchen, Colin O'Neill, the Director of Public Policy and Social Impact at Bowery Farming, Kimberly Smith from Colicchio, Yvette Cabrera, the Director of Food Waste at the Natural Resources Defense Council, their little marks, and Gaeleen Quinn, the Head of Impact at Too Good to Go. So I'm going to invite you each up and to stand with me, and I will ask you a question that she'll be able to answer in 1 minute or less. So, Mike, join me first, please. Okay. Why is there an urgency to address this issue and pass the Food Donation Improvement Act now? I have to hold on.
Okay. Thanks, Danny. It's great to be back here. Great to be in this room of food fighters, old friends, Emily, Tom. It's just fantastic. And really an amazing opportunity for DC Central Kitchen, as we were one of, if not the catalyst behind and model for the original act. And that act allowed our community kitchen model to proliferate around the country and allowed us to grow from a social service organization to a social enterprise economic development engine that now produces $8 million of our own revenue through social enterprise food-based programs, all using purchased food, while we're training individuals who have faced barriers to employment to get jobs, good jobs with living wages. Over half of our staff our graduates of our program. But even with that, the food bank just released a study that said 36% of people in this city, the capital of the United States of America, are food insecure. 36%, and 77% of them are working. We also lead the nation in senior food insecurity at 20%, and have some of the highest numbers of childhood food insecurity at 30%. So that is why this is needed now. But it is only a tool, and we cannot kid ourselves into thinking that this will change those numbers, but this is one of the pieces of that large vexing puzzle that we all continue to work on.
Thank you so much, Mike. You're a superhero. Colin, nice to see you. Same question. Do you need me to repeat it?
I think I got it.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. First, thank you, Danny, and the whole Food Tank team, and everybody else who's organized this. The backdrop of the Hunger Conference is such an important backdrop for this conversation. I think for folks who don't know Bowery, we're an largest indoor vertical farming company in the U.S. We've simplified our supply chain by growing food close to where people actually live. That only delivers a great product for consumers, but really important for this conversation, dramatically reduces food loss in the supply chain. whenever we have an overproduction in our farm or changes at the last minute, we're able to pivot immediately in real time to our donation and offload partners. So Bowery is really here in solidarity with the food industry because we know that our supply chain is simplified and we're able to offload or donate product, but we know a lot of companies do not have that same luxury. And so we think it's time that Congress, the White House, the food industry, and our NGO partners begin to address real common sense solutions within that backdrop of the Hunger Conference. We need to democratize access to healthy, sustainably grown food, and the Food Donation Improvement Act is one way to do that.
Thanks so much, Colin. Appreciate it. I'm sorry, Kimberly joined me next. How are you, Kimberly? Nice to see you. Do you need me to repeat the question?
I think I've got it.
Okay.
Third time's a charm, hopefully. My name is Kimberly Smith. I'm the CEO of Acopia. I'm honored to be here. Thank you to be part of this conversation. Thank you all for all of your support. We're excited because we are the underpinning technology that helps businesses reduce and prevent their food waste, as well as redistribute their surplus food. So we're honored to be here with all of our advocates here. We work with the businesses, we work with our delivery partners, whether that be paid or volunteers, and of course support the nonprofits that are doing the incredible work in the communities. So we are a underpinning technology company. So why now? I know that's what you're getting for. I know, I'm moving. So when we allow perfectly edible surplus food to go to landfill, we are wasting resources, we are contributing to climate change, and we are denying equitable access for all to nutritious food. And so this is solvable. We have more than enough now. We don't need to produce more food. We don't need a new budget to subsidize the cost of food for all.
Sure.
Why? Because it's ending up in landfill. We're wasting 1/3. I mean, this is a stat that all of my fellow practitioners, are motivated by. 1/3 of all food that's produced for human consumption is wasted every single year. And where does it go? It goes into the landfill. And what is the number one contributor to methane? Food waste, wasted food. This is a circular problem, and it is solvable. And if we can empower businesses to redistribute that surplus, we are laying the foundation to a more food secure and a greener world. We need education. We need, I know you're looking at me. we need expanded liability protection for those donors, and we need write-offs and enhanced tax deductions to encourage their participation. And we can do this. It is solvable.
It is solvable. Thank you so much. Yvette, please join me. One of my favorite people, Yvette Cabrera.
Hi, everybody. I'm with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and one of the things that we do at NRDC is partner with municipal governments and local actors on the ground to help address food waste. One of those things being food rescue. How do we boost food rescue in cities? We recently released a report where we looked at 22 U.S. cities and saw that within those 22 cities, we could rescue an additional 175,000 tons of food per year. And we're in this critical moment right now because since COVID, we, as Tom Colicchio was saying, we've seen governments stepping in and knowing that they have a role to play, and we need to take advantage of that moment. All of the cities that we're working with are actively thinking about food rescue. We have state and federal government asking how they can help, so now's the time to take advantage of this moment and to pass this bill.
Woo, thank you. All right, last but not least, Gaeleen from Too Good to Go. Please join me.
So for those who do go, it's an app that connects restaurants, retailers, and food makers that have surplus food with consumers that want to buy it for a deep discount. We are the surplus food marketplace, the biggest surplus food marketplace in the world. We're live in 17 countries, and I'm really proud to say that we save 2 meals from going to the trash every second. So I come from the food and beverage world. I've been there for 20 years, and I've seen firsthand how much food goes to waste. And I've seen also the evolution and how it's changed. So why now? Because today we actually have the tools, we have the technology, and we have the solutions, but we're missing a lot of
understanding and the awareness on the solution and on the issue, but also on the solutions. So that's why the Food Donation Improvement Act is so important, because it helps clarify and brings light into this problem that it's huge. As we all know, we've talked about the greenhouse gas emissions and how it's hurting our environment, but also food insecurity today is higher than it's ever been. And it's really not only about feeding the hungry, although that's of course very important, but it's also about supporting those who are temporarily food insecure. Those 40% of college students that are food insecure today, that 20% of single parents that are struggling to make ends meet. So today we do have the technology, we have the ability to bring accessibility to food, to empower people to choose and to help them do it without any sort of labeling. So that's what Too Good To Go does. We connect people, we make sure that we're all supporting each other towards the same goal, which is, of course, fighting food waste. And as our friend Dana Ganders would say, we have no food and no time to waste. And the reason why we have to do it now is because we really, really need to accelerate our impact together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. A big applause to Group 1 here. Thank you all so much. You can exit. Thank you. I want to ask now our second group of food waste warriors to join me. Ure Emerjuru. Hold on while I turn the page. Natalie De La Rios and Kenza Zutuni, all of whom are high school environmental studies students at Virginia Beach City Public Schools. Thank you all for joining. I'd also like to invite Regina Anderson, the Executive Director of the Food Recovery Network and also a Food Tank Board member, and Victoria Zapata, the National Program Manager at Food Rescue USA. So Ure, Natalia, and Kenza, I'm wondering if you can all come up first and sort of answer the following question. So we're seeing such an exciting swell of citizen support. You can get closer to me. I won't bite you. Not right now. I'm not hungry. With this legislation and, as we saw with the petition that was presented earlier. And so I'm wondering if you can each share a bit with us about how individuals can really move this forward and help promote food recovery.
Yes, so something that we've done throughout the past couple of years is that we go to businesses and we ask them to donate their excess food, but we were constantly denied because they were obviously concerned about the liability behind it. But, that led us to pass our own bill in Virginia, and we were really happy about that being signed into legislation. But I think one thing I want to highlight is that there was this night where about 30 of us were in the cold rain waiting for this truck to come. And, I'm a teenager, so I could have been hanging out at the beach near us or doing anything else, but we were just waiting there because we realized the importance that food had to so many people around us, that there were plates that needed to be filled, and where we live, about 20% of people are food insecure in that area, and it was really important to everyone. And I think the best thing people could do is recognize that issue, and that's the first step towards food recovery.
Thank you so much. That was so inspiring. Thank you.
So as Ray kind of touched on, we got that bill passed this year, and obviously none of us have professional legislative experience, and we don't even have our...
What do you mean?
But what we did have was a support system. We had awesome teachers at the Environmental Studies program. We had state legislators. We had professionals in the field. Many of them are here today that encouraged us, that supported us, and that made us feel secure in taking a seat at the table and being a part of the solution. And so that's what we as individuals can do. We can not only use our own voice, but we can amplify the voices of others, and we can share opportunities, share connections, because in doing that, we're growing our power, we're growing our ability to fight food waste and fight insecurity at a level that's exponential and not linear. And at this point, we need exponential action, we need exponential solutions, and we need exponential results.
Woo! Growing their power. Thank you for being here.
Yes, of course. Sorry, I have notes with me.
No, of course.
To make sure
I have
notes. Anything. So the point that I'd like to reemphasize is the need to rally our communities. As organizers, we tapped into one of the most effectual resources available to us, student volunteers, to actualize our vision for food recovery. With each rescue, we worked hand in hand to distribute numerous tons of food, adapting our methods to fit the demand and needs of the people. So we even sought out insight from the cafeteria staff of our high school, and it's these shared experiences in service that enable the building of interpersonal skills, as well as critical thinking and skepticism of pre-existing systems. Just as the Food Donation Improvement Act serves to expand upon the Emerson Act, we as individuals can bring out the true brilliance in one another, and when we act and gather as a collective, using our common goal of food recovery to inspire direct action in fellow leaders of tomorrow. The waste of precious food and human resources will begin to cease if we remember that community is a pillar of each person's identity, a source of strength and resilience. And one final note, take the time to seek out your people, and you will find allies in unexpected places.
Woo! I love it so much. Let's give them another round of applause. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting multiple notes in real time here. So, Regina, please join me. Again, Regina is the head of the Food Recovery Network. So, how can we get citizens involved?
Absolutely. So first, thanks to the Piscataway Kanoi on whose land we sit, to whom I pay rent. A couple of things. So this is homework for everyone. Individuals, you are all individuals. The first thing is Food Recovery Network. We're the largest student-led movement fighting food waste and hunger in the U.S. So if you have a connection to a university, check to see if that university has a Food Recovery Network chapter or a recovery program. We want higher ed to be the first sector where food recovery is the norm and not the exception. Today we're actually recovering the food. So this event, if we can do it here, you can all do it in your event. So make sure that happens. The second thing is we've heard a lot, from everyone. We can no longer work in silos. Our wages are suppressed. We know that. Revenue is going up, but wages are suppressed. So what can we all do about that? We should be agitated. When we think about bell hooks, all about love. When we can all walk in our values and our ideals. We don't have to be smarter than anyone else. We don't have to be braver than anyone else. But we do need to remember what we are here to do, and that is to love one another. And we can do that by helping to ensure people are no longer hungry. So that's the second thing we can do. Third, please get in touch with Food Recovery Network. We want to know all of you. This is a movement, and you are officially invited.
Woo! Thank you. Regina always makes me cry. Okay, and finally, and last but not least, Victoria Zapata. So nice to have you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you so much, you all, for being here. So I'll be really, really concise. As a part of the Food Recovery Network on the tail end where we rescue the food, I want to encourage you all to be stewards in your own community. So very simply, plan. Be a part of the plan. It's a wedding, it's an anniversary, there's catered events. Anytime you have those types of events, make sure that you look up your food bank, look up those recovery resources. We're all on the website. A simple Google search and you will probably find a social service agency that can help you to recover those items. The second thing I would say is to advocate to your local councilmen and women about just awareness, make those requests, make those inquiries. Same to your school systems. Where is that extra food going? Do we have a place? Do we have a plan? And then the last thing I would like to say, which I don't think I've heard today, is just really embracing poverty. And that being really a root issue of what we're addressing, right? We are a tail end fix to a bigger issue, but then also just bringing some mindfulness to the fact that food insecurity and excess food are not the same thing. They are not synonymous. They are two things happening simultaneously. And so we can have the conversation as a collective, but then also appreciate that one doesn't have to exist with the other. They're not in tandem.
So well said. Thank you so much, Victoria. Another round of applause for them, please. Thank you all so much. That was amazing. I now hope you'll all join me in welcoming Democratic Congressmember Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas, who will give some remarks right now. Let's give her a round of applause, please.
I want to end hunger in my lifetime. I don't know about any of you, but I want to end hunger in the United States and around the world. And I am... I hope you had your morning coffee. I want to end hunger around the world and the United States. Let me thank you for the opportunity, and I was delighted to listen to the soldiers on the battlefields from the Environmental Studies program. I wanted to hear all of them, and what outstanding ideas that they have given us, and take a dose of courage to put in whatever your porridge is, and I think you can follow them. Give them another big hand, if you will. I'm one of the convinced travelers of this mission. I happen to be a protege and a admirer of my late friend and Congressman Mickey Leland, who the Hunger Center is named after. And of course, his work was about hunger. And he lost his life in the midst of trying to feed the starving persons in the Sahara Desert in 1989. That was a continuation because the continuing droughts give rise to that almost every decade. Here we are in the United States with what has been called a breadbasket of America and the world, or a breadbasket of the world, and we face hunger and we have options. And that's why I'm excited with Chairman McGovern, Chellie Pingree, and it is bipartisan in Representative from South Carolina who has joined to make this the kind of legislation that we can get behind and get to the president's desk. That's always the goal. We want this to become law. So I am delighted to be part of H.R. 6251 as a co-sponsor, and to just emphasize to you how simple it is to ensure that we put a construct in place, and that's simply what this bill is about, to give a greater sense of protection from those entities that would want to donate food. Someone mentioned weddings, and it's catered, and that's a caterer. It might be a small business, but there may be a huge amount of food left over that can be utilized for hungry people. Let me be very clear that hunger impacts millions of Americans who are working. It could be a household of adults that everyone is working and they still experience hunger. We know that 1 in 6 children face hunger, and more are facing it almost every day. We know 18 million children may lose their access to free lunch, free breakfast, and I will tell you in my own congressional district, as the summer approaches, it is so important, the USDA programs that allows for children to have breakfast, lunch, and most people don't think dinner, because the desperation of working parents, single parents, fall on the shoulders of children. And if you have more than one child, you can be assured that it is an impact that many of us would not be able to rise to. And so the Food Donation Improvement Act would create more food for shelters and food programs that serve the poor and undernourished. And I heard one of the speakers just before say that you must recognize poverty versus hunger, insecurity, and that poverty puts you in a constant state. But we must cure all of that, to be very honest with you. Because the bill extends liability protections to food donations that are provided at an extremely discounted price, such as food sold at social markets, supermarkets, and food donations, these have the opportunity of protecting, if you will, the kind of unique entities that would be able to donate food. And I think that's very important. We want to make sure that restaurants across the board, social events across the board, big events where the food is, I think in Washington you are at events all the time, and sometimes I've mistakenly come through a door and walked through the kitchen because it's a big site and they have makeshift kitchens, and so you walk through and you just see loads of containers of food protected, covered, and then not utilized. What do you do with that food? Their obligation or their direction is you throw it away. And that happens across America. Just think of the hot spots of this nation, what's happening in Hollywood, what's happening around the Oscars, what's happening around the Emmys, what's happening around the Grammys, or what's happening on the East Coast and all of the Hamptons and all of these places.
it is clearly a situation where we need this legislation. Let me conclude my remarks by just reminding you that among U.S. households with children under 18, 85.2% of households with children were food insecure, and food insecurity has affected 14.8% of households with children in 2020. So I just leave you with the words that I started with. I want to end hunger in our lifetime. I've worked with the Mickey Leland Hunger Center. They do stupendous work, and I want to pay tribute to all of you who have brought us together. But allow me to speak specifically about my friends that I've worked, yes, 3 decades, and don't calculate age. I started when I was 2. But I want to shout out Bread for the World. We have worked together from Houston to Washington and around the world, and all of you can be the soldiers on the battlefield in the army of defeating hunger in our lifetime. And I will tell you, you'll have the greatest joy, because I tell my little ones when I go to schools, it is better to give than receive. For us, it is better to give to these individuals who are in need of us stamping out hunger now. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Let's get this bill passed.
If I wasn't crying before, I'm crying now. I want to thank Congressmember Jackson Lee for that rousing speech. It is now my great honor to introduce next to the podium Democratic Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton of the District of Columbia.
I want to thank my good friend, Chair McGovern, for sponsoring this event, and thank you to the groups who organized it to highlight the Chairman's Food Donation Improvement Act, which would help expand food donation efforts throughout the country. Tens of millions of American families face food insecurity every year. But ambiguous, outdated, and limited liability protections often prevent businesses and organizations from donating food, leading to massive waste, while Americans like our D.C. residents still go hungry. Because the burden of navigating confusing liability legislation has been placed on local organizations and their communities, they're often pushed to waste food. Here in our nation's capital, which I represent in the Congress, organizations like DC Central Kitchen and the Food Recovery Network have been leading the way, helping fight this senseless food waste and providing food to those who need it. Now it is time for Congress to do our part and pass the Bipartisan Food Donation Improvement Act. Hunger is not a partisan issue. When you're hungry, it doesn't matter what party you think you belong to. It is a community issue, and it's time to address it. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this important bill, and I'm urging my colleagues in the House to support it as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Norton. Always an honor to see you. I now want the next group to join me all on the stage. Brett Swanson, the head of Community Impact and Social Impact at Grubhub. Dana Siles, the Partnership Director at Rescuing Leftover Cuisine. Isabella Bont, the President of Share My Meals. Stephen Jennings, who is the Head of Stakeholder Relations at Whole Del Hayes USA. And Sandra Noonan, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Just Salad. So, Brett. Whoop, I forgot my mic. Okay. So the first question is, something that's been unique about this legislation is the cross-sector partnership to move it forward. From your organization or business's point of view, what role do you think companies and nonprofits have to play in addressing this issue?
Absolutely, and thank you everyone, thank you WeightWatchers, and appreciate being here today. First, it's always fun following such well-spoken congresswomen, so it's great that I'm following up, but I do just think that the cross-collaboration and the public-private partnerships that we can incorporate is huge. I want to ask one question as we start. Who's a Grubhub customer here? Raise your hand. So thank you, first of all, and second of all, you're already contributing in the fight against food insecurity and food waste with our Donate the Change and Grubhub Community Fund programs. Look, the collaborations between food banks, pantries, local fridges, we always hear hunger is a transportation issue. It's a last mile issue. How can we crack that nut? And that's really what we're trying to solve for. But we're also hearing from our hundreds of thousands of restaurant partners across the country is that they want to take part in this fight. How do we help our restaurant partners? And one way that we're doing that is with partnerships and collaborations with organizations such as Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, Means Database, et cetera. But also it's being innovative. And so how do we work and stimulate our local restaurants and economies, purchasing meals directly for them, picking these hot, prepackaged, culturally appropriate meals, taking them to housing authorities, senior centers, vet centers, you name it. And so I think we really need to be as collaborative and innovative as possible. And I just, again, want to say thank you for being here and appreciate everything.
Thank you so much. Collaboration and innovation. Dana, you're up next. Do you need me to repeat the question?
I'm good, thank you.
You want to stand closer? Thanks.
Before I even answer the question, can we just pause for one moment right now and imagine feeling hungry? Your stomach is rumbling, you can't concentrate. Meanwhile, businesses are tossing food. It's like the cost of doing business? No, it's not the cost of doing business. It's at the cost of you, your family, and all of us, especially future generations. Because the air we breathe is being polluted by the food being tossed in the landfills, which is just over 1/3 of a pound of emissions per each pound of food. Okay. Now I will answer your question. So I am honored to represent my organization, that Robert Lee founded, Rescuing Leftover Cuisine. Okay? As a national nonprofit food rescue organization, it's been our consistent experience that the overwhelming majority of businesses are unsure or unaware of the legal protections. Rescuing Leftover Cuisine supports the Food Donation Improvement Act because it will encourage businesses to donate unused food and propel our mission to feed people, not landfills. Increased access to quality food will replace food insecurity with food justice. Food donation is socially, environmentally, and economically practical, and it is just. Our food donor partners, like Grubhub here today, understand this, and they are encouraging other businesses to do the right thing. They also understand that food donation is common sense. Now is the time to turn common sense into common practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that. Let's feed people, not landfills. Isabel, please join me.
Hello?
I hold it.
You can come closer though. Okay. So it's so nice to be in front of an audience who speak the same language. Obviously, I'm not talking about my mother tongue, but about the common language about food recovery and food safety. So as a president of Share My Meals, I just want to give you a small introduction. So we are we are fighting both food insecurity and food waste by recovering healthy meals. And when I say meals, it's really because we make a difference between meals and food, which are really prepared, cooked meal, and we deliver them either directly to the house of the people or through community partners. During COVID, unfortunately, we couldn't work. We have learned a lot during these 2 years, and by delivering 5,000 meals per month on average, we have learned all the logistic aspect necessary behind all this process. And we have also been able to fine-tune a few systems to support the logistics. And one of the very key aspects is definitely safety. When we talk about meals, it's really important that we respect a certain high standard of safety processes. So by launching a barcode system and a labeling tracking system, we are able to follow the container from pickup to delivery. To answer now your question, how could we partner with other...
30 seconds.
Okay, so basically the for-profit organization who develop and have the technology to fine-tune this kind of system, who could make it better and make this system available for other non-profit would be fantastic. This is one aspect. The other one is really to put high safety standard protocol available for all of us and to work hand in hand to develop this kind of safety. And we would be happy to lead that kind of process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you so much. Stephen, could you join me? You have a minute.
5 minutes?
You have 1 minute.
First of all, Bernard and Danny, it's the first time I get to meet you in person.
I know, it's so nice to see you.
Other than a Zoom call,
I know,
so that's great.
thank you.
So I represent the companies of Ajo Delhaize USA. Most of you probably have never heard of that. I know Emily has. But we are comprised of 5 great companies within the U.S. We are the largest grocery retailer on the East Coast, and we're the 4th largest in the nation. So do we have food waste? We do. But we believe healthy and sustainable should be accessible to all. So partnerships are extremely important for us as a retailer. We're not a nonprofit, right? So we want to sell food, and when we can't sell it, our next step is to donate it, always. Always. And it makes good business sense for us. So we need to look at that other side as well, and this is where partnerships with our fellow retailers, manufacturers, and our local food banks come into play, because it costs a lot of money to send stuff to landfill. A lot of money. So not only is it the right thing to donate, but it makes great business sense for us as a retailer. So we fully support this initiative. We thank all of you for allowing us to be here today, and we look forward to future partnership.
Thank you so much. All right, and last but not least, my good friend Sandra Noonan.
Hey, Danny.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at Just Salad. We're home of the Reusable Bowl Program, which keeps tons of single-use packaging waste out of landfills every year, but we're here to talk about food waste. So 2 quick stories. On Friday, I visited a plant in Trenton that had a bin, think of a bin big enough for me to climb into and take a nap in. I looked inside the bin, and there was fresh, delicious, beautiful, overflowing fruit and raw chicken. And all of that food, then think of those bins multiplied by 50, so there are around 50 of them in that plant. That was all grocery store waste that was going to landfill if not for this plant. What did this plant do? They were dehydrating that food, liquefying it, pasteurizing it, and turning it into chicken feed. Because the founder of the company I was visiting was obsessed with the problem of food waste and said, this is what I can do with it. And he has created a company called Do Good Foods. They sell chicken fed on these mounds and mounds and tons of food waste. And so seeing that was just a revelation. So I wanted to share that story. The problem is real. It's horrible. The second story I want to share is about Just Salad. So business is not waiting to reduce food waste. We are acting now. At least at Just Salad we are. And my second story concerns Too Good to Go and my friend Gaeleen there who spoke earlier. We at Just Salad are a well-managed restaurant company. We don't want to waste food. We hate food waste, but we still have it, and we always will, because projecting demand is nearly impossible. So we partnered with Too Good to Go, and since partnering with them, we've saved 22,000 plus meals from going to waste. Again, we're a company that cares about waste reduction. So business is not waiting. I'm here in solidarity to support this bill because we need policy not only for the policy benefits, but to create the cultural change and the change in attitudes that make food waste absolutely unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Business is not waiting, y'all. Thank you so much, everyone. You can exit. Now join me in welcoming our next set of speakers, Jennifer England, the head of partner development at Food Rescue Hero, Courtney Garcia, the head of communications at Replate, Lori Martin, the executive director of Haven's Harvest, Alex Golub, the manager of social, impact, and sustainability at Misfits Market, and Grayson Stewart, the head of sustainability at Gooder. Thank you all for being here. So, all right, first question. So as we wrap up this event, each of you represents an innovative solution, a real solution to addressing food recovery within the food system. Can you share what some of these solutions are and how the Food Donation Improvement Act, among these other solutions, can help move the needle forward? And again, 1 minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So Food Rescue Hero is an app. It's a last mile logistics technology, but it's also a network. We have 14 partners right now that are utilizing this technology to rescue fresh food. We've rescued 100 million pounds just in the last few years, and that hides the fact that 87% of that food is fresh food, much of which are the fresh fruits and vegetables that people that are living in food insecurity need to access or have difficulty accessing. And those are the foods that can also make a difference when you're looking at the health conditions that go comorbid with food insecurity. So Food Rescue has the ability to really increase not just food security, but nutrition security. And our organizations from Northern Virginia all the way to Los Angeles are also opening new access points by delivering food to places like senior high-rises, Head Start programs, community health centers, meaning that we're overcoming the barriers of transportation and time. So Food Rescue has the potential to address nutrition security, food access, time, and transportation deficits. We expect to rescue 2.5 billion pounds of food by 2030 from 100 cities. Woo! To do that, to scale Food Rescue with a last mile solution that leverages volunteers, we need not only support and encouragement, but we need the legal framework to make that possible. And that's why it's so critical to pass this law right now. We need this in order to make sure that we can continue not just to do food rescue at the small scale, but to grow it to what we all know it can be.
Thank you so much. Courtney. 1 minute. Got it.
Hi, I work for Replate. We are a technology platform for businesses to donate surplus food to nonprofits. You can schedule donations on demand. You can schedule recurring pickups. We track your waste patterns to help you reduce waste. We also track your impact metrics from a social and environmental perspective. This year, we're also offering our product as a SaaS model to enhance the efforts of other organizations doing this. 2 quick examples of why this is important. Last year, we had an almond brand, a very big almond brand, come to us wanting to donate 1,000 bags of almonds, little snack bags that were nearing expiration. We had a nonprofit ready to take it. They were excited, yum, almonds. And the day of the donation, the company pulled out because the lawyer said there was too much liability. And this is an almond we're talking about. So it's now rotting in the landfill, creating pollution when someone wanted to eat it. The second example I want to give is a little more personal one. I spoke with Covenant House in New York where we bring food to homeless youth. And I was asking them, how did this affect the youth? What was the reaction? Did they receive it well? And they said, oh, well, they love it, but one thing is they're really surprised, and they tell me they didn't think they deserved to have this kind of food. And it's really heartbreaking because everybody deserves to have that kind of food. So I asked for your support for this bill so that we can keep bringing food to people like that.
Thank you so much. Everyone does deserve good food. Thank you so much. Lori.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, how are you?
I'm glad to be here, thank you. We are incorporated actually as an environmental nonprofit because we're trying to address the waste and the environmental effects of that. So we don't think that we're going to solve food insecurity with recovered food alone, and Tom mentioned that, and so did Victoria. So we do think strong social policy is part of that, and this bill certainly is it. One of the things that we do think that we do, we fill bellies every day, certainly, and we offer resilience, and really strong resilience in a community, and certainly the pandemic has shown us that because we've interwoven the community, and the food that's extra here gets moved over here in order to feed people. And I will say that actually with some folks here in New London, one of the things that came up in addition to the shortage around labor is that some of the shelters don't have the staff to cook food. Right. And so we've been able to move food from actually college to these shelters, and they've had really good food, and it's really supported the community. I think that that part is huge. We do think that recovered food is a community resource. So we really support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that. Community resource. That's what recovered food is. Alex, how are you?
Great, thank you. Just by way of introduction, Misfits Market is a for-profit, affordable online grocery store creating access to high-quality, fresh food and reducing food waste throughout the entire supply chain. The way that we do that is by partnering directly with food producers to capture and redirect all of the food that for one reason or another might not end up on grocery store shelves for reasons such as it's simply excess or has incorrect packaging or near expiration dates, things like that. And so, we're able to deliver food to every zip code within the 48 continental states, and by doing that, we can create access to this high-quality food. So to date, we've already been able to rescue over 230 million pounds of food and donate more than 1 million pounds of food. But this problem is enormous. It's, it affects what we call like the triple bottom line, right? It negatively impacts people, planets, and profits. So, as a for-profit company, we are committed to doing more, and the Food Donation Improvement Act supporting this bill is a really important priority for us.
Thank you so much. Grayson, you have the final word from this group. 1 minute. You have to get closer. They need good pictures.
Thank you all for this opportunity today. I'm with Hoerr, a sustainable food waste management company based out of Atlanta. And at Hoerr, one of the main ways that we fight hunger and food waste is when businesses pay us a fee to divert their surplus food from landfills to local nonprofits, helping businesses support their local communities, reduce their waste and carbon footprint, and being able to deduct up to 30% of their profits through their tax-deductible donations. Despite all these advantages, so many of the businesses that we all talk to every day cite safety and legality concerns as the main reasons they don't donate their surplus food. Our mission here today is to show it's not only good to do the right thing, but that it's safe to do the right thing, it's easy to do the right thing, and it pays to do the right thing. If we can eliminate the ambiguity around donating surplus food safely to those who need it most, we will not only save businesses millions, but also feed millions and empower our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a great way to end. Thank you so much. So you can all exit. Thank you so much. Before I introduce our next speaker, I want to read some remarks from Congressmember Maria Salazar, a Republican from Florida, and she shares, "This is a simple issue that will change lives. Donating food to feed the hungry should not be difficult. This is a textbook example of where a small change in law can make a big difference. I am pleased to join the bipartisan coalition of stakeholders to help reduce food waste and feed those in need." So I want to thank all of our speakers today, and to give us some inspiration as we move forward, we'll have closing remarks from Congressmember Carolyn Maloney of New York, who is a Democrat. Representative Maloney, the floor is literally yours. Thank you so much.
Well, I wouldn't miss it because your wonderful organization is headquartered in the district that I'm privileged to represent. So I definitely wanted to come and support you, and this is such a critical issue. And I'm very proud to join Congressman McGovern, Congresswoman Pingree, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, and Congresswoman Holmes Norton, as well as an incredible coalition of nonprofits that are here from across the country and businesses in the food industry to speak on behalf of this important legislation, the Food Donation Improvement Act, and it's really needed. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, over 10% of American households were food insecure in 2020. As a result, over 35 million Americans, including over 1 million New Yorkers, lack reliable access to nutritious, affordable food. What makes this access gap even more egregious is that between 30 and 40% of our food supply is lost to food waste and spoilage each year. Clearly, the issue is not producing enough food to feed our population, but ensuring that healthy and affordable food gets to the Americans who need it most, and that's what your organization does. In order to tackle this enormous problem, the public-private sector needs to work together, and that's why I'm so excited to be part of that effort to work with you. This bipartisan, bicameral bill will encourage food donation efforts by extending liability protections to donors when leftover food is donated or sold at a steep discount. This is so necessary. I can tell you that in New York, I go to all these conferences, and you're leaving and they just mounds of food, of gorgeous food that was put out for the conference, and you say, well, I can take it to a food pantry, I can take it to a shelter, and they say, no, you can't because of the liability. So this is good food. So this is a really important bill, and it will really put a lot of food out there to people who need it. This very simple change would encourage individuals and businesses to donate food left over at the end of the day, instead of throwing it away and adding to America's excessive food waste. So I'm proud to join you, and I'm a strong supporter of the bill. I'm a co-sponsor, and will continue to work with my colleagues to pass it. And what can I say? Have a great conference, and on to passage. Woo!
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the president.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Representative Maloney, for your incredible leadership and all of the things that you do to make this country better. So for those of you who registered and are joining Harvard Law School's Emily Broadley for lunch and pre-lobby visit trainings, you'll be in the same room for lunch, but before that we have incredible snacks in the back of the room. They cannot go to waste, so you have to eat them or take them with you. And please feel free to stay and network and meet all of the incredible people who are here. But before you get up, stay right where you are. A big thanks to all of our speakers, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, again, for allowing us to use this beautiful space. So let's give her a round of applause. I also want to take this moment to thank our events manager, Kenzie Wade. It's her birthday tomorrow. Be sure to wish her a happy birthday. This event could not have happened without her. Thank you, Kenzie. I also want to thank my co-founder, Bernard Pollock, who makes all of the work that we do possible. He is the greatest strategist and the best friend in the entire world. Thank you, Bernie. I also want to give a shout out to Brendan Konacki and his wonderful team who've done the video and the live stream. They are in the back. You can say hello to them later. Our intern, Julia Agostino, who's been a wonderful part of Food Tank. Congressmember McGovern and Congressmember Pingree's offices, they've been incredible. Jennifer, I don't know if you're still here, but I love and adore you. And a huge thanks to all of the congressional staff, the food workers, especially our caterer, Wally, who's in the back, I think, who's been wonderful. The cleaning staff, security, Capitol Hill Police. Thank you, Capitol Hill Police, for keeping us all safe. Thank you. And of course, to each and every one of you who have come today to put your support behind this issue. I can't thank you enough for being here. So go eat.